I thought my husband was cheating when I saw that text about my menopause. Turns out he was planning something much worse. 3 days ago, I accidentally saw a message on my husband's phone that made my blood run cold. She irritates me. She's in menopause. Sent to a woman named Sarah. My first thought? Affair. My second thought? How dare he reduce me to my hormones while betraying our 25-year marriage? But as I sit here now, hands shaking as I type this, I realize that discovering an affair would have been a blessing compared to what I actually uncovered. What my husband David and his family were planning wasn't just emotional betrayal. It was calculated, methodical, and designed to strip away everything I am. I'm 52, going through menopause, yes. I've been more emotional lately, sure, but I'm not crazy. I'm not unstable. I'm not the problem they've painted me to be in their twisted narrative. The woman he texted wasn't his mistress. Sarah is a psychiatric evaluator, and that message? It was part of a months-long plan to have me declared mentally incompetent and committed to a facility. Why? Because 3 months ago, I inherited $2.3 million from my aunt's estate. Money that, according to our prenup, remains solely mine. I have 72 hours before their plan goes into motion. 72 hours to prove I'm not the menopausal mad woman they've convinced everyone I've become. 72 hours to save my freedom, my fortune, and my sanity. This is how I'm fighting back. Let me paint you the picture of who I was before this nightmare began. Because context matters when your own family tries to gaslight you into oblivion. I'm Margaret, 52, and until last week I thought I had a solid life. 25 years married to David, a successful insurance broker who I met in college. We have 2 kids, Emma, 23, working in Seattle, and Jake, 20, in his junior year at Northwestern. Empty nesters for the past 2 years, which honestly had been an adjustment for both of us. I've always been the organized one, the planner. I managed our household, coordinated family events, handled our social calendar. David used to joke that I could run a small country with my color-coded calendars and detailed spreadsheets. I worked part-time as a freelance graphic designer, nothing glamorous, but it kept me creative and brought in decent money. Our marriage wasn't perfect, whose is after 25 years, but it was comfortable. We had our routines, coffee together every morning, Netflix on Friday nights, Sunday dinners with his parents. David's family had always been intense. His mother, Patricia, is one of those women who believes she knows what's best for everyone. His sister Linda lives 3 blocks away and drops by unannounced constantly. His brother Mark, a lawyer, always made me feel like I was being cross-examined during casual conversations. But I tolerated them because I loved David, and family is family, right? The menopause hit me hard about 8 months ago. Hot flashes, mood swings, insomnia, the whole package. I'll admit, I wasn't myself. I cried more easily, got frustrated faster, felt overwhelmed by things that never bothered me before. David seemed understanding at first, even sweet about it. He'd bring me ice packs during hot flashes, didn't complain when I kicked off the covers at 3 a.m. My Aunt Eleanor died 4 months ago. She was my mother's sister, never married, no kids. We weren't super close, but she always remembered my birthday and sent thoughtful Christmas gifts. When her lawyer called to tell me I'd inherited her entire estate, her house, investments, everything totaling $2.3 million, I was shocked. David seemed happy for me, or so I thought. We talked about maybe renovating our kitchen, taking that European trip we'd always planned. The money was mine legally. Our prenup, which his lawyer brother had insisted on back in 1989, clearly stated that inheritances remained separate property. Looking back now, I can pinpoint exactly when things shifted. It was the day after the inheritance paperwork was finalized. David started making little comments about my episodes, how I was overreacting to normal situations, how maybe I should talk to someone about my mood swings. His family joined the chorus. Patricia would sigh dramatically when I'd express an opinion, saying things like, "Oh, Margaret's just going through a phase." Linda started asking David, in front of me, if I was getting help for my condition. Mark would make jokes about hormonal women and their irrational decisions. I started second-guessing myself. Was I being too emotional? Was I overreacting? When you hear something enough times from people who are supposed to love you, you start to believe it. But I wasn't losing my mind. I was grieving my aunt, adjusting to hormonal changes, and dealing with a family that suddenly seemed determined to make me feel small. The inheritance should have been a blessing, a chance for financial freedom and new adventures. Instead, it became the catalyst for the most terrifying experience of my life. 3 days ago, David left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered. It buzzed with a text, and I glanced over instinctively, something I'd never done before in our entire marriage. The message was from Sarah, and it said, "She irritates me. She's in menopause. How much longer do we need to document her episodes?" My world tilted. Who was Sarah? What episodes? What documentation? That's when I started digging, and what I found made me realize that the man I'd shared a bed with for 25 years was a stranger, a dangerous stranger. The first thing I did after seeing that text was something I never thought I'd do in my marriage. I started spying on my own husband, but everything began to unravel 3 weeks earlier, and I was too trusting to see the signs. It started with Dr. Morrison. David had suggested I see our family doctor about my menopause symptoms, which seemed reasonable. What I didn't know was that David had called ahead, painting a picture of a woman spiraling out of control. During what I thought was a routine consultation, Dr. Morrison asked strange questions. Have you been having trouble with reality lately? Do you ever feel like people are against you? Has your family expressed concerns about your behavior? I answered honestly. Yes, I'd been emotional. Yes, David's family had been making comments. Yes, I sometimes felt overwhelmed. Dr. Morrison nodded sympathetically and prescribed hormone therapy. But I later discovered he'd documented our conversation very differently. According to his notes, which I found later, I was paranoid, emotionally unstable, and showing signs of psychological distress. Then came the concerned family meetings that happened without me. I started noticing hushed phone calls that stopped when I entered the room. David would quickly close his laptop when I walked by. His family's visits became more frequent, and they'd all watch me with this strange intensity, like I was a specimen under a microscope. Patricia started keeping a journal. I found it one day when she left her purse open on our kitchen counter. Page after page of my supposed incidents. Margaret snapped at David over dirty dishes, irrational anger. Margaret cried during a commercial, emotional instability. Margaret forgot where she put her keys, possible cognitive decline. Everything I did was being documented, twisted, and weaponized against me. The breaking point came during what I thought was a family dinner to celebrate Jake's good grades. David's entire family was there. Patricia, Linda with her husband Tom, and Mark with his wife Susan. The conversation kept steering toward my health. "Margaret, you seem tired lately," Patricia said with fake concern. "Are you sleeping well?" "David mentioned you've been having some difficulties," Linda added, exchanging a look with her mother. Mark, ever the lawyer, was more direct. "Have you considered that these hormonal changes might be affecting your judgment? Maybe it's time to think about getting some professional help." I felt like I was being ambushed. "I'm fine," I said, but my voice came out shaky, which only seemed to confirm their suspicions. "See?" David said gently, putting his hand on mine in a gesture that felt more patronizing than loving. "You're getting upset over nothing. This is exactly what we're worried about." That night I heard David on the phone in his study. I crept closer to the door and heard fragments, getting worse. Documented episodes. The inheritance is complicating things. Need to move faster. But the real revelation came when I found the folder. 2 days after the family dinner, David left for work but forgot his briefcase. I was going to drive it to his office when it fell open in my car. Inside was a manila folder labeled Margaret, Medical Documentation. My hands shook as I read through it. There were copies of Dr. Morrison's notes, Patricia's journal entries, even a letter from Linda describing my increasingly erratic behavior. But the most chilling document was a consultation report from someone named Dr. Sarah Hendricks, a psychiatric evaluator. The report, dated just 1 week prior, detailed a preliminary assessment of my mental state based on family interviews and medical records. It concluded that I was showing signs of severe menopausal psychosis and recommended immediate psychiatric evaluation and possible involuntary commitment for my own safety and the safety of others. I had never met Dr. Sarah Hendricks. She had never spoken to me, examined me, or even seen me in person. Yet she had written a professional recommendation to have me committed based entirely on my family's lies. The final document in the folder was a draft petition for guardianship, with David listed as my proposed guardian. If successful, he would have complete control over my finances, my medical decisions, my entire life. The inheritance wasn't just a motive, it was the timeline. They needed to act before I could do anything with the money, before I could hire my own lawyers or doctors, before I could fight back. That's when I realized the woman who received that text wasn't David's mistress. Sarah was Dr. Sarah Hendricks, and she was helping my husband steal my life. The next 48 hours were the most terrifying and eye-opening of my life. I had to pretend everything was normal while secretly gathering evidence of my own family's betrayal. I started by creating a hidden folder on my laptop and photographing every document in David's briefcase before returning it to his office. Then I began what I called Operation Sanity, systematically proving my own mental competence while exposing their lies. First, I scheduled my own appointment with an independent psychiatrist, Dr. Rachel Kim, without telling David. I paid cash and used my maiden name. Dr. Kim conducted a thorough evaluation, cognitive tests, psychological assessments, the works. Her conclusion: I was experiencing normal menopausal symptoms with some mild anxiety, but was completely mentally competent. She even noted that my hypervigilance and concern about family dynamics suggests healthy self-preservation instincts, not paranoia. Armed with this professional validation, I started documenting everything. I set up a hidden camera in our living room and recorded Patricia's next visit. The footage was damning. She literally coached David on what to say to Dr. Hendricks. Remember to mention the time she threw the coffee mug. Make it sound more violent than it was. For context, I had accidentally knocked over a mug while gesturing during a conversation. It didn't even break. But the most revealing moment came during what David thought was a private phone call with Dr. Hendricks. I had started recording all calls on our landline using an old voice recorder app. "Sarah, we need to move this along," David said. "The inheritance money is just sitting there, and Margaret's been asking questions about financial planning. If she starts moving assets or hiring her own advisors—" "I understand the urgency," Dr. Hendricks replied. "But we need at least one more documented incident to make the involuntary commitment stick. Can your family create a situation?" "What kind of situation?" "Something public. Maybe she has an episode at a restaurant or family gathering. Something where witnesses can testify to her instability." My blood ran cold. They were planning to stage an incident to frame me. The trap was set for my birthday dinner, 3 days away. David had made reservations at our favorite restaurant and invited his entire family. I realized this wasn't a celebration. It was an ambush. I spent those 3 days preparing my counterattack. I contacted my aunt's lawyer, who was horrified by what I'd discovered, and immediately referred me to a specialist in elder abuse and financial exploitation. I opened a separate bank account and moved half the inheritance money to protect it. I also reached out to Emma and Jake, carefully explaining the situation without sounding paranoid. Both kids were shocked but believed me. Emma said she'd noticed the family acting weird during her last visit. Jake admitted that Mark had been asking strange questions about my behavior during their phone calls. The night before the dinner, I overheard David's final planning call with his family. They had choreographed the entire evening. Linda would make a comment about my appearance. Patricia would bring up my forgetfulness. And Mark would suggest I was making poor financial decisions. They expected me to get upset. And when I did, they'd have their witnesses. But I had a different plan. I arrived at the restaurant early and spoke with the manager, explaining that I was dealing with a family situation and might need assistance. I also positioned my phone to record the entire dinner. When David and his family arrived, they were all smiles and fake warmth. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," David said, kissing my cheek like a loving husband instead of a man plotting to steal my freedom. The performance began exactly as planned. Linda made a snide comment about my tired appearance. Patricia, helpfully, reminded me about things I'd supposedly forgotten. Mark started questioning my big financial decisions. But instead of getting upset, I smiled calmly and said, "You know what? I have something I'd like to share with all of you." I pulled out a folder, my own folder, and placed it on the table. I know about Dr. Hendricks. I know about the guardianship petition. I know about everything. The silence at that table was deafening. The moment I placed that folder on the table, I watched 25 years of marriage crumble in real time. David's face went through a spectrum of emotions: shock, fear, anger, and finally, a cold calculation that I'd never seen before. "Margaret, what are you talking about?" he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Patricia reached for the folder, but I pulled it back. "I'm talking about your plan to have me declared mentally incompetent so you can steal my inheritance," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I'm talking about Dr. Sarah Hendricks, who you've been texting about my episodes. I'm talking about the fake medical documentation and the guardianship petition hidden in your briefcase." Linda's face went pale. "You went through David's private papers?" "I went through papers about my mental health and my future," I shot back. "Papers that discuss having me committed based on lies you've all been telling." Mark, ever the lawyer, tried to take control. "Margaret, you're clearly upset and not thinking rationally. Stop." I held up my hand. "I have recordings of your phone calls. I have photos of all your documents. I have an independent psychiatric evaluation proving my competence. And I have witnesses." I gestured toward the restaurant manager, who had been discreetly watching our table. "I've also moved half of my inheritance to a protected account and hired my own attorney." David's mask finally slipped completely. "That money should benefit our family, not just you. You're not thinking clearly about our future." "Our future," I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean the future where I'm locked in a psychiatric facility while you control my money?" Patricia tried a different approach, her voice dripping with false concern. "Sweetheart, we're worried about you. These accusations, this paranoia, it's exactly what we've been trying to help you with." "Help me with?" I opened the folder and pulled out Dr. Kim's evaluation. According to an actual psychiatrist who examined me, not one who wrote a report based on your lies, I'm completely mentally competent. What I am is a woman going through menopause whose family decided to gaslight her for money. The restaurant had gone quiet around us. Other diners were starting to stare. David leaned forward, his voice low and threatening. "You're making a scene, Margaret. This is exactly the kind of behavior that a sane woman has when she discovers her husband is trying to steal her inheritance." I stood up, no longer caring who was watching. "The kind of behavior that any rational person would have when they find out their family has been documenting their every move to build a case for involuntary commitment." I pulled out my phone and played a snippet of the recorded conversation between David and Dr. Hendricks about staging an incident. The color drained from David's face as his own voice filled the space between us. "Something public. Maybe she has an episode at a restaurant." "This restaurant," I said. "Tonight. This dinner was supposed to be my public breakdown, wasn't it? You were all going to provoke me until I got upset, then use my reaction as evidence that I'm unstable." Linda started crying. "We just thought. The inheritance changed you. You've been so different." "I've been different because I've been grieving my aunt and dealing with menopause while my own family plotted against me." My voice rose, but it was controlled anger, not hysteria. And yes, inheriting money did change me. It made me a target. Mark tried one last legal maneuver. "Even if what you're saying is true, which I'm not admitting, you can't prove intent to—" I pulled out the guardianship petition with David's signature. "Can't I?" The silence stretched until David finally spoke, his voice hollow. "What do you want?" "I want the truth. I want you to admit what you've done. I want Dr. Hendricks to retract her fraudulent report. And I want all of you out of my life." Patricia was sobbing now. Margaret, please. We're family. Family doesn't try to steal each other's freedom, I said. Family doesn't gaslight each other for money. Family doesn't conspire to have each other committed to psychiatric facilities. David looked around the restaurant, realizing that dozens of people had witnessed this confrontation. His reputation, his business relationships, everything was crumbling. The inheritance made you paranoid, he said desperately. This whole conspiracy theory. I smiled for the first time that evening. David, I have recordings. I have documents. I have witnesses. The only theory here is the one you created about my mental health. I gathered my folder and stood to leave. Oh, and David, I've already filed for divorce. You'll be hearing from my attorney. As I walked away from that table, leaving behind 25 years of marriage and a family that had betrayed me in the cruelest way possible, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Free. The aftermath of that dinner was swift and devastating for them. Within 24 hours, my attorney had filed restraining orders against David and his family, citing emotional abuse and financial exploitation. Dr. Hendricks, faced with evidence of her fraudulent evaluation, immediately retracted her report and agreed to cooperate with the medical board's investigation. She later lost her license. But the real transformation began with a phone call I never expected. 2 days after the restaurant confrontation, Linda called me sobbing. Margaret, I need to see you. Please, there's something you need to know. Against my lawyer's advice, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop with my attorney present. Linda looked like she'd aged 10 years in 2 days. Her hands shook as she placed a thick envelope on the table between us. I can't live with this anymore, she whispered. What we did to you, it wasn't just about the money. She opened the envelope and pulled out bank statements, legal documents, and what looked like medical records. David's been stealing from his clients for 3 years, she said. He's facing federal charges. The insurance company is investigating him for fraud. He owes over $800,000 in restitution. My attorney leaned forward. How do you know this? Because Mark's been helping him hide it, Linda said, her voice breaking. They used our family business accounts to launder money. When Margaret inherited that money, David saw it as his way out. But he needed control of it, and the only way to get that was to have me declared incompetent, I finished. Linda nodded, tears streaming down her face. Patricia knew. We all knew. We convinced ourselves that you'd be better off in a facility, that the stress of David's legal troubles would be too much for you anyway. We told ourselves we were protecting you. The room spun around me. It wasn't just greed, it was desperation. David was facing prison time, and my inheritance was his lifeline. There's more, Linda continued. She pulled out medical records. Patricia's been forging your signature on medical documents. She's been calling your doctors, pretending to be you, asking them to increase your hormone medication. She thought if you were more emotional, more unstable, it would be easier to prove I was incompetent, I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. My attorney was furiously taking notes. This is criminal conspiracy, medical fraud, identity theft. But I was focused on Linda, who was completely breaking down. Why are you telling me this now? Because Emma called me, she sobbed. Your daughter called me yesterday and said something that broke my heart. She said, Aunt Linda, my mom thinks her whole family hates her. She thinks she's going crazy. What kind of people do that to someone they love? Linda looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. We're not those people, Margaret. Or we weren't supposed to be. But fear makes people do terrible things. And we were all so scared of losing everything that we lost ourselves instead. She reached across the table, but I pulled my hands back. I know you can't forgive us, she continued. I know we destroyed any chance of that, but I couldn't let you think you were crazy when you're the sanest person in this whole mess. You figured it out. You protected yourself. You were stronger than all of us combined. Over the next week, Linda's confession opened floodgates. Patricia, faced with evidence of her medical fraud, broke down and admitted to everything. Mark, trying to save his law license, provided evidence of David's financial crimes. David himself never admitted guilt, but he didn't need to. The evidence was overwhelming. The federal investigation moved quickly. David was arrested for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. Mark lost his law license and faced criminal charges. Patricia was charged with identity theft and medical fraud. But the most surprising transformation was in myself. For months, I had questioned my own sanity, my own perceptions, my own worth. I had let them convince me that my emotions were symptoms, that my reactions were pathological, that my very existence was a problem to be solved. The truth set me free in ways I never expected. I wasn't the menopausal madwoman they had painted me to be. I was a woman going through a natural life transition who had been systematically abused by people who were supposed to love her. My instincts had been right all along. My emotions had been appropriate responses to gaslighting and betrayal. The inheritance that had made me a target became the tool of my liberation. I hired the best attorneys, the best therapists, the best financial advisors. I moved out of the house I had shared with David and bought a beautiful condo downtown. I started traveling, something I had always wanted to do but never prioritized. Most importantly, I started trusting myself again. Emma and Jake were incredible throughout the entire ordeal. They testified on my behalf, supported my decisions, and helped me rebuild my sense of family. We grew closer than we had ever been. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new home office, looking out at a view I chose for myself, writing this story that I never thought I'd have the courage to tell. David was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Mark received 3 years and permanent disbarment. Patricia got 2 years probation and community service, plus she's required to pay for my therapy. Dr. Hendricks faces her own legal battles and will never practice medicine again. But this story isn't really about their punishment. It's about my transformation. The woman who walked into that restaurant 6 months ago was someone who had been systematically taught to doubt herself. I had been conditioned to believe that my emotions were symptoms, my instincts were paranoia, and my very existence during menopause was a burden on everyone around me. The woman writing this today knows better. I've learned that gaslighting doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow erosion of your reality, so gradual that you don't notice until you're drowning in doubt. They didn't just try to steal my money, they tried to steal my sense of self, my confidence, my very sanity. But here's what they didn't count on. I'm stronger than they thought. The inheritance that made me a target also gave me the resources to fight back. But more than that, it gave me something I had lost over the years: independence. For the first time in decades, I didn't need anyone's approval to make decisions about my life. I've started therapy, not because I'm crazy, but because I'm healing from psychological abuse. Dr. Kim has helped me understand that everything I felt, the confusion, the self-doubt, the fear, was a normal response to abnormal treatment. My relationship with my children has never been stronger. Emma moved back to our city, and we have dinner every week. Jake calls me almost daily. They've both said that seeing me fight for myself taught them something important about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. I've also connected with other women who've been through similar experiences. There's an entire community of women whose families have tried to use their age, their hormones, their life transitions against them. We're not crazy. We're survivors. The money? I've used it wisely. Part of it went to legal fees, of course, but I've also donated to organizations that help women escape financial abuse. I've funded legal aid for women who can't afford to fight guardianship proceedings. I've supported research into elder abuse and medical fraud. And yes, I've spent some on myself. I took that European trip I always wanted. I bought art that makes me happy. I enrolled in photography classes and discovered I have a talent I never knew existed. But the most important thing I've gained isn't material. It's the knowledge that I can trust myself. My instincts were right. My emotions were valid. My reactions were appropriate. I wasn't the problem. I was the solution. To anyone reading this who recognizes something familiar in my story, trust yourself. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If people who claim to love you are making you question your sanity, question them instead. Menopause isn't madness. Aging isn't incompetence. Being emotional isn't being unstable. And inheriting money doesn't make you a target. It reveals who the real predators are. If you're going through something similar, document everything. Trust your instincts. Get independent medical and legal opinions. Protect your assets. And remember that the people who truly love you will support your autonomy, not try to control it. I'm 53 now, officially post-menopausal, and I've never felt more powerful or more myself. I'm dating again, a kind man who thinks my strength is attractive, not threatening. I'm building a life that's entirely my own choice. The family that tried to destroy me, they're dealing with the consequences of their actions. I don't hate them anymore. Hate takes too much energy, and I have better things to do with mine. I'm not the same woman who found that text message 6 months ago. That woman was scared, confused, and doubting herself. This woman knows exactly who she is and what she's worth. And to David, if you're reading this from prison, you were right about one thing. The inheritance did change me. It changed me from a woman who would tolerate being diminished into a woman who knows her own power. That's the best revenge of all. Have you ever had your reality questioned by people who claim to love you? Have you experienced gaslighting during major life transitions? Share your stories in the comments. Let's support each other and remind ourselves that we're not alone, and we're definitely not crazy. Trust yourself. You're stronger than you know.